You may be seated. I'm just going to ask your patience for one moment because the microphones seem a little bit off. Sorry, I didn't want it buzzing for you the entire time. On behalf of the family, I want to express appreciation to all those who have been able to join with us today, whether you are here with us in person or joining us via the live stream. Your presence and your thoughts, I know, are very comforting to the family. Many of you who have been with Barbara for a very long time, who have been some of her students and mentees and co-workers, and friends of the family, we deeply appreciate your being here as we have an opportunity to bid our final farewells. At a time such as this, time of great loss, we are taught to look to the book of Psalms to find comfort. It also helps us to find words when we're not exactly sure what words there are to say, because no one knows exactly what to say, what is going to be of comfort in a particular moment to a particular mourner. And so we'll recite from Psalm 15. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai mi'agoro lecha mishkon b'har kodshecha. Holech tamim u'foel tzedek v'daver emet bilvavaho. Lo regala lishono lo asal rehura v'cherpa lo nasahal al krovoho. Nivzeh be'enav nim'as v'yet yir'ei Adonai yichabed. Nishba laharav lo yamir kaspo v'lo natan b'neshech v'shachad anaki lo nakach osei ele lo yimohot le'olam. A psalm of David, who can dwell in God's holy presence, who can merit a place in the presence of God. One who lives her life with integrity, who does what is right, who speaks the truth without deceit, who has no slander upon her tongue, who does no evil to others and does not mistreat a neighbor, who spurns a contemptible person but honors those who revere God, who would never retract a promise once made, even if it were to bring her harm, who lends no money at unfair rates and accepts no bribe against the innocent, one who makes these deeds their own. They shall stand firm with you, God, forever. Barbara certainly lived her life with an incredible integrity to who she was and what was important to her, integrity in terms of the academic rigor that she brought to her work, and an integrity of the passion that she brought to bring more goodness into our world. We'll now continue as the cantor will chant for us Psalm 23.
Mizmor LeDavid. Adonai roi lo echsar, bino deshe yarbitzeni, al me benuchot yenahaleni, nafshi yishoveim, yancheni v'magle tzedek, למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות, לא אירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צורריי, דשנת ושמן ראשי, כוסי רוויה. אך טוב החסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me to lie down in green pastures and leads me beside still waters. God restores my soul and guides me in straight paths for God's name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Words of remembrance, I want to ask one of people who Barbara worked closest with, Sharon Rausch, to come up and share a few words. Barnhart. Sorry? I thought you said Rausch.
I guess I have to say that I've known Barbara for a long time because I met her when I was pregnant with my first child, so I was out to here at a professional meeting, and he's 42 now, so that's how long I've known her. We worked very closely, but we also were extremely close friends. And so I can tell you about her work, but I'm actually not going to. I thought what I'd do is tell you something I think probably nobody knows. Or maybe a few people know this, but I know this wasn't talked about. She and I and another woman named Susan, not the Susan over there, we seem to have several Susans in this group, all shared an interest in knitting, classical music, and reading mysteries. And then he gets up and he says, "Can I help you up?" And she says, "No, I have to wait for the wheelchair to come." And he goes, and the whole book is sort of using things related to disability, because what actually prompted the book, and you could stop me if I'm going on too long, we were at a meeting for the Society for Disability Studies, and there was a huge brouhaha between the, quote, non-disabled and disabled people about who could, I don't know exactly, I don't remember, it was a long time ago, but something about who could do research or, but there was this huge fight and everybody was really upset. So when we started thinking about the mystery, we said, okay, well, let's use that as the background and let's kill off the person that we thought was the instigator of this. But then, of course, at the end, we figured out what the end was. This was going to be some romantic thing that had nothing to do with the meeting. But Barbara was just amazing when we wrote this. We would say ideas, and she would write a chapter. And this was not the Barbara that I had worked with, because when we worked together, sometimes she would say, well, the next sentence should be, and she'd give me 2 words and I'd have to finish it. But when we were writing this mystery, and we got, I think it had 150 pages, handwritten, but unfortunately we couldn't figure out, well, one of the things in the plot was that 2 of us signed, maybe 4, 5, 6 years before she really stopped working. She was getting information about the censuses from 1840 to 1890, which was when they started having a disability question in the census. And then it stopped after 1900. It stopped for a while, but she had collected tons of information about those censuses, about the results, about what people said about them, and written about what was wrong with the questions, which was a lot. But unfortunately, she didn't finish that either. I did include some of her data and some of her comments in a paper that I wrote, which was published 2 years ago, with her name on it too. And she knew that, but I just wish she had had more time, but don't we all, always? Anyway, If you have questions about her work or anything, I mean, there are a bunch of us who've worked with her. You know, I'm sure we're happy to talk about it. Goodbye, Barbara, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you for those words. And I think it is clear through the work that you've continued to do and the work that others, that even though she wasn't able to finish each of her projects, the work itself will continue on in so many ways. I'd now like to call upon her niece and nephew, Dan and Rachel, to share a few words.
Her own path, doing what she knew was right both personally and professionally. Sorry, I thought I'd get through it without getting too emotional, but that never really works out. So she grew up in a small coal mining town in Pennsylvania, and after going away to school, met our Uncle Paul. They got married, and after starting their family, she continued her education, leading to a long and dedicated career as a sociologist. She's considered by her colleagues to be a founding mother of disability studies, establishing the American Sociological Association's section on disability and society. She dedicated her career to the study of disability and society, publishing books and papers, working with the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the United Nations, receiving several awards for her work. She continually broke down barriers, working on things she was passionate about. Even more than her work, she dedicated her life to family, and that was really what she was most passionate about. And Barbara genuinely cared. This was evident in the way she raised her 3 boys, in her career, and every time you spoke to her. She loved her family deeply and was immensely proud of Michael, Mark, and Andrew. This week, as I spent time thinking about her, I reread the article she wrote a few years ago about raising Andy and doing what she knew in her heart. Not what anybody told her to do.
My dad, of course, was Barbara's brother, younger brother, by 8 years. And the way he tells it, because she was always the older sister, she was in charge or not home, and definitely did not want my dad, her brother, to go into her bedroom. So she put a lock on it. Eventually, he got older, and with that, of course, he grew taller, so he could finally reach the lock. You see, it was on the outside of the door. So when she left, she would lock it, and he couldn't reach it to unlock it. But as he got taller, he could now lock it, reach the lock. And he did, and locked her in. And of course, he tells this story with great amusement. And I've also had the pleasure of hearing this story also from my Aunt Barbara's perspective, and she was anything but amused. As you know, from working with her and from what my brother was talking about, Barbara had many, many accomplishments and so much impact on so many people. And it starts at home, and she had a lot of impact on me too. And I don't think she realized it. Growing up, and then as an adult with my own children, I love being able to go visit. Machine, which I know she did a lot of sewing. It brings me back to that vacation when she was visiting when I was just 6 years old. And she always welcomed me and my family into her home. Even when we were planning a visit, me and my husband and my kids, we were planning a visit to come, and then Hurricane Sandy hit, and she was out of power for a week, and still said that we were welcome to come visit. There just might not be any power or running water. We ended up delaying, but when we did come, we would spend hours around the kitchen table talking, catching up on everybody in the family, life, talking about nothing and everything all at the same time, like that bedroom lock story. And she'd always indulge my desire to sightsee in DC, giving me the best way to get around and making sure that we had a ride to and from the train. I was lucky enough to come to this area to visit many times at all stages of life. One such visit, I was young and impressionable, and at one of the conversations at the kitchen table, Donnie O'Connor, I'm not even sure how he's referred to, was brought up, and Sid Charisse, which it sounded to me at the time were two of her favorite actors, and I had never heard of them. The first time I watched it in their living room. Hey, I have hosta, and I know what it is. And the enthrallment was definitely one-sided, not the most exotic thing she had ever planted. But with her lessons, I hope one day that I'll have a garden of my own that's as beautiful as hers. And of course, anything we plant, she will be thought of dearly. Lastly, to me, Aunt Barbara was the family historian. She had all of the pictures, and my Uncle Paul was kind enough to make copies for me. Sitting around the table, we would go through these pictures, and she countless times would tell me, each visit, again, who everybody was and a story about everybody. And just from the picture, she knew what the occasion was. And it was really nice to get to know the family that I didn't get a chance to meet. And I hope to pass those down to my family as well. My time spent lounging and learning from Aunt Barbara will always be treasured. May her memory always be for a blessing. I will miss her dearly.
Thank you both for those beautiful remembrances. She is, that Barbara was the last of her generation. Barbara was clearly an exceptional student. When the University of Pennsylvania announced in February of 1954 that for the first time women would be admitted to the undergraduate programs of the School of Engineering and Applied Science and the Wharton School, the last programs at Penn that were still excluding women. They accepted 15 women to begin their studies in Wharton, and one, Barbara Mandel, applied and was accepted to enroll in the School of Engineering and Applied Science. Remarkable. But as it so happened, that was also the year that she met Paul, whose parents had recently moved to Pottsville, and he had returned home from his military service on leave. He went to a social event at the local synagogue to meet a few people, and it was there that he met a beautiful young woman named Barbara. It would take a few more years until Paul was out of the service and Barbara was no longer a teen before they would get married, but a marriage that lasted a lifetime. Paul returned from the military, enrolled in Penn State and State College, and Barbara transferred. After graduation, they moved to Middletown, Pennsylvania, and then Harrisburg, where Paul worked and built a house they lived in since 1966. In those early years in Rockville, Barbara kept herself busy raising children, knitting and sewing, as we've been hearing about, which included making elaborate gowns for women in the neighborhood to wear to the various gala events in D.C. Paul had grown up in an observant Orthodox household with a much more religious background than Barbara, but the boys remember Barbara being the driving force in their religious lives, quite literally driving them to Hebrew school at what was then the early days of Beth Tikva, ensuring that Mark and Michael would be able to celebrate their respective bar mitzvah in this very sanctuary. At the time, there were no programs in the Jewish community for someone like Andy to be able to celebrate his bar mitzvah. I don't know if that played a role in Barbara's decision to pursue her PhD in sociology and a career in disability studies, but it was right about that time that he would have been preparing that Barbara enrolled in a graduate program at Maryland. It's hard to imagine that this was just pure coincidence. In any case, Tikvat Israel maintained it over the many, many years, keeping a kosher home, ensuring that their boys and families would have a firm sense of jugal for holidays. Mark and Michael remember that Paul was not initially enthusiastic about Barbara's decision to go back to school, but as was usual the case, when Barbara wanted something, she prevailed. They also remember that Barbara's hours in College Park meant she wasn't always home to pick up Andy from his day program, and so they would get to go get him, which gave them a little bit of extra time with him. After completing her PhD, Barbara continued on as an instructor, and Paul, who always enjoyed cooking, took on more of the home responsibilities. Especially after he retired, he became chief cook and grocery shopper, enabling Barbara to do so much to reach the heights of her career. Quite remarkable for a man who didn't originally want her to work. And it says even more about the strength of Barbara's personality and her determination. As an instructor and the undergraduate coordinator in the Department of Sociology at the University of Maryland, Barbara had opportunities to work with a wide range of students, including, as it turned out, many of the football players. This, among them, was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, relatively unknown player when he first came from East Islip, New York. In fact, Maryland was the only school that made an offer to Boomer Esiason. But he made the most of his. Barbara began to focus her research on people with disabilities and help transform the nature of disability studies, moving it from a field focused on physical limitations to a much more holistic approach, understanding how cultural assumptions, poverty, medical care, and race all impacted our understanding and the treatment of people with disabilities. As her good friend and colleague Beth Rash explained, she changed the field of disability research. And not only in America, but internationally, especially through her work with the Washington Group under the auspices of the United Nations, where she developed culturally compatible measures of disability for international use. As Sharon Barnhart and Frank Scott wrote in an obituary to send out to the American Sociologist Association, Barbara was a founding mother of disability studies. She was instrumental in the creation of the Society for Disability Studies, serving as its president in 1990 and 91. One of her mentees, Stephen Gulley, explained the impact that she had, noting that there are now degree-granting programs in disability studies across the country. But back when he was a student, what few classes we had were almost exclusively focused on medical treatment and rehabilitation, not civil rights, not community development. In 2014, at the young age of 78, she was the recipient of the ASA Award for Distinguished Contributions to the Sociology of Disability. If her scholarship had been her only contribution, we would have said, as we do on Passover, Dayenu. It would have been enough. But Barbara was also known for being generous with her time and her expertise in sharing with colleagues and students, serving as a mentor, a friend, a colleague, and a role model to many in our community. This included Stephen Gulley and his wife Carol, who had read her works and idolized her as undergraduates at Oberlin College, and later, while working on a PhD at Brandeis, Steve reached out to her as a long shot to see if she would serve as an outside member for his dissertation defense committee. When she received the letter, she immediately picked up the phone and called him. Carol answered the phone and excitedly ran in to tell Stephen, Barbara freaking Altman is on the phone. And they would repeat this line many times over these past 25 years. A year later, when he sent her a 350-page document with 15 tables and a bunch of charts for her to review, he was shocked when, in his words, 2 weeks later, she sent it back with copious comments in the margins. He said she had read every last word. And he noted that she also took him and supportive of others. For many, each of those pairs of characteristics stand in opposition to one another, but for Barbara, they were pieces of the whole. These last years since her stroke after Paul's death and then immediately going into COVID have been difficult. She wasn't able to leave the house as much, but she was never alone. Mark rigged up a series of Alexa devices so that he could drop in on her from California each morning, ensure that she took her pills, check in later during the day, and say goodnight and turn off the lights each evening. Michael would also drop in on her each day from Hong Kong. She would regularly be in touch and always see Andy as much as she possibly could, even as it became more difficult in these last few years. And she was always surrounded by a series of caregivers. A series because only a few of them lived up to her high standards and earned her trust. But those who did truly came to love her, and she them. I know some of them are here with us today. I know, Beth, you played an important role with that, taking care of her, as I understand, yes? Right? During the year of COVID, her niece Julia came to live with her while she was studying to be a nurse. And in these past few years, Rebecca and Moji were an indispensable part of her care team. Able to put also this week that we read the section of the Torah describing the Israelites crossing the sea, moving from slavery to freedom. And often, especially for those who have seen the movies, we focus on the role of Moses lifting up his arms and the song, as they sang a song and the Israelites crossed through the sea. But that song, we are told in the Torah, was sung by Miriam, and she led the women dancing and singing. I think in some ways this is also an apt metaphor by which we can see Barbara. When it comes to research on disabilities, there are many people who have contributed to the field. But Barbara is one who is able to take that work, contribute to it, and help to make it sing, giving it voice and movement, leading the way to freedom, helping others find their voice, to do the hard work, but also to rejoice and to celebrate their accomplishments. In our tradition, Miriam is always associated with water, the essence of life. In her life, Barbara truly lived and modeled for others a life that was full and rich, deep and meaningful, helping others to sing and dance. Her death leaves an unfillable hole in our hearts for all who knew her, especially, of course, for Mark, for Beth, for Michael, Anne, Nick, Naomi. Her younger family will follow behind out to the hearse. Those who are coming to the cemetery will ask you to get a placard from our funeral directors who are here, and to put on your hazard lights as well as your headlights, and to follow in procession. There will be opportunity for people to gather this afternoon following the burial at the house on Melinda Lane, and there will be a service this afternoon at 4 o'clock, and then tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock after Shabbat. I ask that you please rise as you're able.
Hey.
המרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה, תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהם את נשמתה. אדוני הוא נחלתה, ותנוח בשלום על משכבה, ונאמר
Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure. To the soul of Avigail bat Nachman Lev Rivka, Barbara Altman, the daughter of Leon and Rebecca Mandel, who has gone to her eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May her soul be bound up in the bond of life. May she rest in peace. And let us say,
Amen.
Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the service for the synagogue. At this time, we will be going to the Day Memorial Party. Please go to your car and turn on the bright lights and four-way flashers. There's some yellow stickers by the board you got.
I left in the speaker room. Did you see them? Yeah, and for the people will be returned. They will be returned for the room to the speaker. Oh. For enter. Y that door needs the key all the time. I left in the door.